All right, Matthew chapter 13, the last three of the seven kingdom parables. And if you'll recall, those of you who have joined us the last couple of weeks, there's a break in the seven kingdom parables. The first four are given publicly. They're given outdoors to the public, to believers and non-believers, to the disciples and those who are just interested. He's giving the first four parables to the crowds. Then they go inside the house and he's speaking only to his disciples or the believers. And there's a distinct difference that we're going to see in the nature of the first four parables and the last three parables, although they concern the same subject matter. The first four of the parables, if you'll recall, are telling us that after the nation of Israel officially rejected Jesus as their Messiah, the offer of a physical kingdom went away. It was no longer an option for them. Jesus had come to offer them a physical kingdom. They rejected him. So now his kingdom is going to become a spiritual kingdom until the second coming. So these seven kingdom parables are describing what form the kingdom will take in that interval between the resurrection and the return of Christ. The first four are given publicly because they are showing, Jesus is showing by the first four parables, the nature that the church will take, the nature that the kingdom will take and be perceived by the world, if you will. And if you'll recall, what we learned is that it's not very encouraging because the church, in the world's eye and in the world's mind and in the physical realm here on earth, becomes something that was never meant to be. You know, the mustard seed grows into a tree. Well, mustard is not a tree. And the evil birds come and rest in its branches. That means the church is going to become this huge thing, this huge entity with different levels of hierarchy and different levels of stuff, extraneous stuff that have nothing to do with the gospel. That so much so that evil can inherently make their home within that entity. Right? We talked about why Jesus used mustard. Mustard is a very spicy and pungent herb. And that's what the gospel, what the church was intended to be. Something simple. Something that would go out into the world and bring fire to the world, to bring this pungency to the world, to let the world understand that they're desperately in need of a savior. Instead, what the church became was this huge monstrosity that was more focused on its own ease, its own comfort, its own power, its own place in society than it was in going out and being mustered. Then we saw the lady surreptitiously mix the leaven in the meal offering, the grain offering. Right? There's evil that's come into the church that has puffed the church up. Because I've said it before many times that I don't know if it really takes. At the underlying cause of every single sin we commit is pride. Every single sin we commit is pride. That's the underlying cause. This is why God teaches us and the scriptures teach us so much about humility. Because humility is the opposite of pride. Because when you're humble, when you're truly humble, it's an attitude. It's not simply an action, it's an attitude. That attitude where you recognize your own inability to please God, your own inability to do anything of value to God unless you do it through Christ and through the Holy Spirit. But pride causes us to sin because it elevates us to a place where we never were meant to be. Look at Adam's sin, right? We all understood Eve tasted the fruit first, but the Bible considers that Adam's sin, because if you read the story closely, God told Adam, you can eat any tree, but not that tree. You can't eat the fruit of that one tree. So where do we find Adam and Eve in the story? Adam has taken his wife that God gave him to that one tree. Now, the garden wasn't some tiny little place. You know, it wasn't 2 acres where they couldn't avoid the tree. No, it was huge. So why in the world would Adam take Eve to the tree? You ever thought about that? And then when it says, and Satan in the form of the serpent is talking to Eve, debating with Eve, trying to tell Eve something opposite of what God had taught Adam. And if you'll read the text closely, it says that Eve took and ate and gave some to her husband who was with her. So Adam is standing there watching this whole interaction between Eve, the woman he has been given, the woman whose responsibility was his to protect. He's watching this interaction and in essence using her as a test dummy. Well, let's see what happens when she eats it. So instead of the God ordained thing that he had told Adam to do, Adam reversed it. Adam said, I know more than God. This is a way for me to get to that tree. Let the woman try it. See what happens to her. Well, she's okay, then I'll eat it. That's why it's Adam's sin, not Eve's. Adam never should have took Eve to the tree. Never should have allowed her to go to the tree. And as soon as they got to the tree and a serpent starts speaking to her from that tree, pick her up and take her out of there. But he doesn't. He wants to see what's going on. It's in direct defiance of what God had instructed him to do. And that came from pride. So I don't know how we got off on that. I didn't intend to get off on that. Oh, the leaven in the meal. The church has become puffed up. And we all can very well see that, can't we? We've all been in those churches that are just like, man, this place is a castle. This place is a palace. What are you doing for Christ? And the truth is, most times, not much, if anything. So then we have the wheat and the tares. And this is Jesus simply saying that, it's under control. Yes, the tares, the evil is going to grow up alongside the wheat. But at the end of the age, I'll send my angels out and we'll separate them then. Just leave them alone until then. Because the honest truth is, the form the church is going to take, especially in the minds of the world, is not something that is going to promote the gospel effectively. There's always a remnant. There's always good churches out there. But the vast majority of what Christendom is, those who call themselves Christians and Christian denominations, actually serve no purpose at all for the kingdom. They're like the mustard that grew into the tree. They're like the leaven that was put in that loaf and it puffed it up. They're the tares. So any questions on what we talked about last couple of weeks? Nothing? Okay. 3 short little parables finish out the kingdom parables. And like I said, there's a change. He's no longer speaking to the crowds. He's just simply speaking to his disciples. So what we're going to see is there's no bad things in this view of the kingdom, because this view of the kingdom is the heavenly view. When we taught the book of Revelation, went through the book of Revelation a while back, one of the reasons the book of Revelation confuses people is because they fail to understand that sometimes in the book of Revelation, we're looking at the same thing from different perspectives. So sometimes when you get confused on the book of Revelation, you've got to remember we're being given the humanly vision and we're being given the heavenly vision of the same event. An easy way to understand this is in the book of Daniel. You understand that when Nebuchadnezzar is given the vision of that statue, has that dream, that statue, and Daniel comes, and what Nebuchadnezzar sees is this beautiful, magnificent statue, right? The head of gold, the silver, the bronze. It's a beautiful statue. And a rock comes and smashes it, right? Well, when the interpretation is given, we're given heaven's view of that very same thing. And what heaven sees on that beautiful, what man sees as something magnificent and beautiful, what heaven sees is these ravenous empires that go around killing each other, that are constantly at war. So we see these two different aspects oftentimes in the scripture, but we see it here. So now we're going to look at the kingdom from heaven's perspective. Keep that in mind. It'll help you understand, because the honest truth is, I've heard a lot of sermons and read a lot of commentators where I think they get this completely wrong. The parable of the treasure in the field and the parable of the pearl, the great pearl of great price. And tell me if you've ever heard somebody teach you this, that these two parables tell us that we should give everything we have to find Christ. So they equate the treasure and the pearl with Christ, that we're to give everything we have because it's worth it for Christ. I've heard that sermon many times, but that's not what he's talking about. That's not what Jesus is talking about at all. Remember, these are the kingdom parables. He's telling us what the kingdom will be like, what form the kingdom will take. He's told us what form the kingdom takes in the physical that we can perceive. Now he's going to tell us the form that the kingdom really is. So read it with me, if you would. Verse 44. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Okay. The consistency and the symbology of the parables. Who is the man in the parables? We haven't suddenly switched from the man being Christ to the man being somebody else. The man is Christ. What's he find in the field? He's not sowing something in the field. He has found something in the field. He finds something of great treasure. Psalm 135:4 and Exodus 13:14. I'll get you that reference. It's in Exodus. Are two places in the Old Testament where God calls his people a peculiar treasure, the nation of Israel. In Exodus, he said, if you obey my laws, you'll be a particular treasure. And the Jewish word there, actually my ESV, I don't like their translation of it, because the Jewish word is a word that means particular treasure, a special treasure. In Psalm 135, verse 4, is somebody looking that up? Am I right? I'll do it myself. Yeah, Psalm 35:4, 135:4. For the Lord has chosen Jacob for himself, Israel as his, ESV says own possession, but the Jewish word means particular treasure, his own treasure. So we're given a clue on what the treasure represents. Let me just cut to the chase. The treasure is the nation of Israel. The Lord found the nation of Israel in the field, and he went and sold everything he has for that people. But I want you to notice he keeps the treasure hidden. What happened to the nation of Israel throughout their history? They were meant to be God's particular treasure. They were meant to be his chosen people to share the love of God with everybody, to introduce everybody to God. But yet they failed to serve him over and over and over and over. So much so that there's many in the Christian world who teach a replacement theology, that the church has now replaced Israel. But that is not the case. Remember what Paul says in Romans? Paul has a whole soliloquy on this. What then? Is God done with his people? No. He's never been done with the nation of Israel. He has set the nation of Israel aside. In other words, he's hidden them back in the field until it's time for him to come back. Then the nation of Israel will become his peculiar treasure and will be the center of humanity. The Lord will rule the nations from Jerusalem, from the nation of Israel. Questions, comments, and concerns about the particular treasure? Jesus is the man. He's got a particular treasure, and he joyfully goes and sells everything he has. Now, what does that symbolize? What did Christ give up for the church? What did Christ give up for the Jews, for our salvation, for our redemption? Give up everything.
Yeah.
Right? Then we come to the one. So
I had a quick question on that one about the hidden treasure.
Yeah.
I always kind of struggled with this one because it almost seems deceitful that the man finds the treasure and then he hides it again and then he goes to buy the field. They're like, that doesn't sound quite right.
Yeah, it does. And I have had those same thoughts. I have had those same thoughts, but when you understand what he's really doing with these parables, and remember the field is the world. That it's the expositional constancy. The field means the same thing in every parable. So the field is the world. He finds something of great value in the field. Now, let me try to be more specific and answer, I think, what you're saying and help you understand, because there is a little deceitfulness there. Who does the world belong to? After Adam fell in the garden, who does the world belong to? Adam gave up the title deed to the planet Earth. This is why when Satan is tempting Jesus, he can say, look around you. I'll give you everything you see. Why? Because it's his to give. Right? So when Jesus finds, or God finds, that particular treasure, that people, we're in warfare. There's a spiritual warfare going on. So that may explain some of the deceitfulness, but I don't think that's really his intent here. He's just saying he found something in the world that was so dear to him that he was willing to go sell everything he has. But yet at the same time, this treasure is still hidden. It will come forth one day. At the second coming, that treasure will be on display for everybody. Okay?
Yeah, and you said that the world belongs to Satan, but doesn't it? I mean, ultimately it's God, because it's more like Satan stole it than that.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus bought it back at the cross.
Mm.
So yeah, he didn't just redeem humanity; he redeemed creation.
Mm.
So he just has not taken up possession of it yet.
Okay.
And the reason he hasn't is bound up in the kingdom parables, because they rejected him.
Yeah.
The reason he hasn't taken up possession of it yet is chapter 12 of Matthew. And I don't want to get too far into eschatology here, but when Jesus comes, he will not come back. Jesus himself says he will not come back until they cry out for him, until they recognize who he was and cry out for Christ, cry out for Jesus, the Son of God, to come save them. That's at the end of the tribulation period.
That being the Jews.
That being the Jews, his people, right? His chosen people. So until they cry out to Christ, which explains Satan's fury against the Jewish nation, because he still thinks he can win. He can't, but he thinks he can. And he thinks if I kill all the Jews, there'll be no Jews left to cry out for him. And he won't come back, because God cannot lie, and he said it.
Mm.
So, and we're in danger of going off way somewhere else. But at the end of the age, the Jews will once again be God's treasure on display for everybody, and they will be blessed beyond all the other nations. We have a different future in store for us, as evidenced by the next parable, the pearl of great price. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who on finding one pearl of great value went and sold all that he had and bought it. Now, we're going to have to get into a little bit of ancient sociology, ancient beliefs, ancient teaching. My mother is a big pearl girl. She always has been. She's always loved pearls. So I don't know that much about pearls. I do know how they're formed, right? You've got an oyster, gets a grain of sand or some kind of irritant in there, and it produces that mother of pearl, that stuff that lines inside of an oyster. It keeps covering it and keeps covering it and keeps covering it, and it won't stop covering it. If something triggers in that oyster, then it must continue to cover it. That's why over time pearls get bigger, and the bigger they are, the more expensive they are, and so on and so forth. So let's just go through the symbology here real quick before we talk about what the pearl represents. Oysters come from the sea. When you see symbolically, specifically in the prophetic passages, symbolically the sea stands for the Gentile nations. So if something comes from the sea, it comes from the Gentile nations. That's what it's talking about. Oysters are not kosher. They weren't allowed to eat oysters. They weren't special to the Jews. Jews cared nothing about oysters. The only reason they cared about pearls was because somebody else would come buy them. Jews didn't particularly like pearls. They held no value to them. But yet, around the sea, Gentile merchants would come looking for pearls. So yeah, they'll sell them pearls because they didn't want them. They came from an unclean animal. And the ancient teaching was that for a pearl, and I doubt this is the case, but like I said, I don't know nothing about pearls, but he taught that in order for the pearl to continue to have its luster, you know, when you look at a real pearl, you can see that whatever special quality it has that makes it look like a pearl. I mean, they're beautiful, but there's a special luster about a pearl. It's not like a diamond that reflects the light, but you can turn it and well, you ladies who got pearls know what I'm talking about. That's why you like them. Guys, go look at your woman's pearl sometime. Have her show it to you. But in order for the pearl to continue to have that luster, it must be worn. Specifically, it must be worn around the neck close to the heart. Okay? That was the ancient belief about pearls. So what is Jesus really saying? Here's another treasure that he finds. And it's a treasure that comes from something that has hurt its host. Something that has hurt its host. Is everybody locked up?
Jeff,
Yeah,
it locked up. For
Okay.
us, it did.
Yeah, everybody was same. They hadn't moved. Did we hear anything?
You left off where you're saying it was the ancient thought that pearls had to be worn next to the skin, specifically the heart, to keep their luster.
Okay, so that's what they believed. So what Jesus is saying, I believe, is that this pearl came from, was something that was produced from the very thing that hurt its host. And it's very dear to him. And in order for it to fulfill its purpose, it must be worn by him. It must be intimately worn by him. This is not something he hides, right? It's not like the treasure. The treasure's hidden in the field. The pearl is on display. And the pearl is becoming larger and larger and larger and more beautiful and more beautiful, and more valuable to God and more valuable to God. But here's the thing. The church is composed of the very people who nailed him to the cross. And he paid everything he had for those very people who beat him, who spit on him, who nailed him to the cross, so that they could be on display for all eternity about how beautiful they are. We've talked about this before. What is the future of the church? What is the destiny of the church? We don't have the same destiny as the nation of Israel. We have a different destiny altogether. We are the bride of Christ who will rule and reign with him for all eternity. We have the most privileged position of all of humanity for all of eternity. We have a privileged position above the nation of Israel. We have a privileged position above anybody. Not because we deserve it. Matter of fact, we're the ones who hurt him. We're the ones who caused that pain and suffering on the cross. We're the ones who caused him to go to the cross so that he could take that hurt and continue to mold and make us into his image so that we will be on display for all eternity, for all of creation, not because of our own worth or goodness. We are on display and privileged beyond any other created being, simply to show all, the angelic realm, everything, the glorious grace of God. That's why we're so privileged. That's why we're being turned into the image of Christ. That's why we're to look like Christ, to talk like Christ, to act like Christ, so we can model his grace, so we can model and teach about his glory, not our own. And that's what the pearl does. The man sees this pearl, sells everything he has. Jesus gave his life for that beautiful pearl. so that he could wear it intimately and display it for all. You don't put your pearls on, ladies, and tuck them into your shirt, do you? Oh, you put your pearls on so they can be seen. Questions about the pearl? We are the pearl. You're a pearl. The church is the pearl. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. When it was full, men drew it ashore and sat down and sorted the good into containers, but threw away the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them in the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So it just bookends it with the wheat and the tares. But this is not just about the wheat and the tares. This is about the whole world. Again, what does the sea symbolize? What's it symbolic of? The Gentile nations. So this is just talking about the second coming, when he's going to gather everybody together, and those who are believers, great. We'll save those. We'll keep those. But the unbelievers will be thrown into into hell. Questions, comments, concerns? That's all I got for tonight. We can move on. Don't have enough time. Are y'all frozen, or just nobody has a question?
Well, it also takes a long time for people to like navigate on Zoom. So whenever you ask questions, it's not nearly long enough to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I still have no idea how to use this. I feel so dumb.
Quick way is you hold space.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot you took
Doing a
class.
great job. I can see you.
I'm making the meatloaf right now for
You
that.
making meatloaf? I'm making some. Jenny's making some. I got 16
watching.
pounds of beef.
Hey, Chris, you making meatloaf for tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Out of
Yeah,
deer meat?
No, I've just bought the mix. Beef, veal, and pork.
Back to I have